Welcome to the Grandpa Channel, where stories don't fade, they get recorded. I'm Steve Harris. My grandkids call me Rivers. This podcast is where grandpas and grandchildren pull up a chair, turn on a mic, and let her rip. Grandpa stories are chock full of wisdom, life lessons, and frankly, funny as hell. Your stories are the magic elixir to help your grandkids navigate Mr. Toad's wild ride, aka life. Let's Grandpa. This episode of the Grandpa Channel is brought to you by Hires Big H, home of wonderful hamburgers, French fries, onion rings, the magical and medicinal, so I say, root beer freeze. Head to Hires and treat yourself like the legend that you are. Now back to the channel. Hi, and welcome to the Grandpa Channel. I'm Steve Harris, aka Rivers, and today we have a terrific guest. He's a good friend of mine, Steve Newton. Steve is one of the most fascinating people I know, so I'm building Steve up, hopefully not for a fall, but for a magnificent performance today. But we want to talk about grandpas. And so, Steve, I was just going to ask you, what kind of memories did you have of your grandfathers? Did you know both of them?
I had two grandfathers, and I knew them very well. I taught my grandpa, one of my grandpas, how to golf.
No way.
When he was 70, we gave him golf clubs at 70, and I took him out and showed him how to golf. He had a terrible swing. At 86, he had some kind of heart attack and was staying at our house and, trying to make sure that he was okay. And my little brother, not understanding the seriousness of the problem, came in and said, "Grandpa, let's go golfing." Every day, he would take a 7-iron and a putter and one golf ball and go golf. And he shot par.
No.
I was a better golfer than him for about 2 weeks.
Did his swing improve?
His swing was fabulous I mean, he would go all the way around like this at first, but he would golf every day.
So what was he like?
He taught me how to swim. He was a swimmer. He would swim 4 or 5 times a week. And when President Kennedy had his 50-mile, he started a 50-mile swim. And my grandfather was one of the first people to actually finish that 50-mile swim. He served in World War I, was gassed.
Was he in France? Or?
Yes, the Ardennes.
Yeah. Did he talk much about it?
He didn't. He didn't talk about it at all. I mean, that was the stupidity on my part of not getting it. I've inherited his journal. Mm-hmm. And he kept a fabulous journal of his time and, what he thought he was getting into and his trip over there on the ship and how, he thought he was getting a suite and it ends up, he's in the very bottom of 6 guys in a tiny little room and fabulous stuff because he wrote it down and we just don't do that anymore.
Oh, we don't. When did he die?
Let's see, probably around 86. He was 88 when he died, and that would have been about 1980, 87, 89, something like that. So he was.
That's pretty cool. Your other grandpa?
My other grandpa was, didn't have the same. He wasn't a lawyer in any profession. He worked on the railroad. He was a funny guy. He was a fun grandpa. Spoiled his grandkids rotten. Just loved the heck out of us. And cut his lawn every Saturday. All the grandkids would fight to go cut his lawn because he would overpay us. And he'd take us out and we'd get a cheeseburger and we'd go to Grand Central and get a little something.
Living the high life.
Yeah. I just have such wonderful memories of my dad's dad.
Did they like to spend time with their grandkids? Did they seek out their grandkids?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Especially my dad's dad. They just lived for us, and I was the oldest of his grandkids, so I was old.
Now, tell me about your dad. I happen to know a little bit about Steve's dad, just from talking with Steve and a few other things, and he was a remarkable man. I'd like you to tell me a little bit about him, and then tell me what he did, maybe what he didn't do as a grandpa. I mean, I don't think we have any perfect grandpas out there. But anyway, he was a really remarkable man. Tell us a little bit about it.
Well, he grew up, and the Depression was really tough on his family. My grandpa was in the railroad. Depression came. He loses his job. My grandma got a job, but it was really tough. And they had family move into the house so that they could keep their house. And fortunately, they were able to keep their house and not lose it. But they really struggled, and Dad was a very sickly little kid. They were through the Depression. My dad said he lived on canned tomatoes. And you think, well, that's not good for your brain, but my dad is one of the smartest people I've ever known. But maybe canned tomatoes is a better brain food than we understand. I don't know. He was a smart little kid, ends up #1 in the nation on the MCAT. And I asked him one time, I said, I didn't know this until 2 years ago. Until he was 98 that he had, that he had done so well on the MCAT. I said, well, how did you do that? He said, a big part of the test was the Battle of Blenheim. And I'd read a book on it, and he had almost a photographic memory. So he aced it because I'd never heard the Battle of Blenheim. 1700 and 1704, I think. Critical in European history, but it was over the Spanish Succession. It was called the Spanish Succession War that Spain didn't fight in.
Go figure.
Go figure, yeah. It fought in Germany.
Yeah.
And it involved all of the European powers struggling and fighting, and probably inspired George Washington's watch out for entangling alliances. But he had read a book on it, and he had absorbed it all, and he already knew it. And it's this complicated political interaction that he had nailed down.
Was he the sort of guy that if you met him, you go, ooh, this guy is really, really bright, almost kind of nose in the air?
Long.
Yeah. Yeah,
because he was really socially skilled. He would always want to know about you. So he was always talking about you. And if you happen to ask him any question about anything, he would have the answer. But
did he use that with his grandchildren? Did he focus on them? Did he use that kind of curiosity?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
He knew what all the grandchildren were doing. Grandchildren and 6 kids, but he knew what they were all doing. Just amazing, and being able to keep up on it, making calls to his grandchild.
This is when he's 100. That is amazing. It's almost like I think a lot of people, and some have to, but some people just check out. But it sounds like your dad was the opposite of checking out. He was checking in.
He said, well, I want to sell my house. I said, well, you're in a fabulous neighborhood, and everybody knows selling this house. I mean, this is where the family gathers. He says, no, sell a house, going to move into an assisted living place, independent living. Well, great idea, but Dad, whatever you want, well, that's what we'll do. So we did. And he moved into an assisted living. This is brilliant. Because pretty soon he knew everybody. And had a lovely kind of hotel lobby and a dining room. Yeah. It was everybody thought, well, that's Grandpa's hotel. So, and he didn't want the big suite. He wanted just a little studio. And I thought, Dad, you gotta have. He took the money that he saved by living in a little studio, and then he would buy everybody lunch at the restaurant. They said he had more guests and more people that ate the restaurant with him than anybody else.
That is cool. Was he like the mayor of this independent living center?
Yes, it became like that because he knew everybody. And every time I'd walk in, he would introduce me to everybody.
Really?
And he would have something wonderful to say about everybody that he introduced. And so he said, I've forgotten most of my old neighbors, but because there's only so much brain space. But he really taught me a lesson about, boy, that's how you want to go. Lifting everybody around you by probably half of his brain power, and still smarter than everybody.
Where did his love of people and curiosity come from? Was it something he was born with? Or was something that was inculcated in him by your grandparents? I mean, where do you think all that came from?
My grandmother particularly was really smart. That's where the brains came from. And they were pretty social, but not tremendously social. I just think you just either learn it or inherit it or whatever. He just became very, very good at dealing. And he was a pediatrician. So he learned how, and interact with moms and children, and he just became very good at that. And so that's his skills that way.
You mentioned to me, is it you or was it your father who did on Thanksgiving Day was that you that brought in people for painting and art?
Yes, that was my dad.
So tell us about that.
Well, every Thanksgiving they'd gather up all of the family that could come, and then Thanksgiving Eve there was a sleepover, and the sleepover was all the grandkids. He would prepare a canvas for everybody and real oil paints, and they would do oil painting on this Thanksgiving sleepover.
Is that a great memory for your kids?
Oh, absolutely. They loved it. Everybody loved it. All the grandkids loved it. They had a great time. They came back with a little baby oil painting from the next day.
And so
he took up oil painting.
Yeah, I was going to say, how old was he when he took it up?
Probably 80. But he took up oil painting, and he did a lot of paintings. He did 2 portraits of my grandparents, his parents, that were incredibly good. I treasure those. We have those. And a portrait is a very hard thing to do. You can always do a landscape or people that you don't recognize. But if it's a portrait, it kind of actually looks like the people that you're painting. Just incredibly good.
I mean, your dad sounds like he's almost too good to be true, but he's true. And he is. I mean, he must have been incredible, but did he have any kind of quirks or anything that took him out of being translatable?
Well, his greatest regret was that he didn't spend more time with our family, because he was a pediatrician doing house calls. He was the last doc to give up house calls. I mean, I went on house calls with him, driving out to Holiday, which was out in the middle of nowhere, out past the Cottonwood Mall, and we went in there and the child had scarlet fever or something. I mean, he was a dedicated pediatrician, and that took up a lot of time. But I said, Dad, you took off every Thursday afternoon, and every Thursday afternoon, we as a family, our kids, we just loved Thursday afternoon because it was our time with Dad, and we'd always go do something. So I think one of the issues you have is everybody's situation is different. Some people can retire early. Some retire late. My father-in-law retired early, 62. He was an incredible grandpa, but I was surprised in later life finding out that, well, he just wasn't that much as a father, because he was a major general, and he was in the CIA. So his real job was CIA, but his part-time job was he was the head of the reserve in 9 states. And so, he didn't, then he held church callings, and I mean, he was a busy man. But when he retired, he was the greatest grandpa ever.
What would he do?
Well, he was just there. He was at our house 2 or 3 times a week, and he wasn't the funny kind of grandpa, but he was there, and he was a powerful kind of influence, and we all adored him. And he built our house, I mean, in the sense that we bought a house that the contractor lost his job, and he lost his contractor's license for the crappy job and he and I learned how to do construction and plumbing and stuff like that from him, even though he didn't have that kind of a basic background. But he just learned it, and then I learned it from him. He learned plumbing and electrical, and I learned drywall, so I knew drywall. The best built part of our home is the shed. Yeah, incredibly well built. 220 power,
Was he the kind of guy that he was good company, or was he pretty quiet while you were with him?
Oh, he was great company.
Was he? Yeah.
And he had stories, and he grew up in the Depression, and he struggled through the Depression. You can imagine he had World War II stories that we didn't hear much. We drag a little out. His stories were amazing.
What theater was he in? Pacific or the European?
he had been a missionary in Germany in the late 30s.
Wow.
He was there during Kristallnacht. He had pictures that he took of Hitler driving by. So he was there as it was all beginning to happen and said, there's going to be a war in the,
Wow.
or he got in the ROTC.
Yeah.
He says, I'm going to be an officer. But he knew German. So he ends up coming out of ROTC and headed to Europe. And they put him in charge of prisoner interrogation, and that's he went from second lieutenant to lieutenant colonel. And again, the Polish government, out of power, gave him the highest award that Poland can give to a non-Polish person, because in interrogating the prisoners, he was interrogating all these Poles that had been captured. Interrogating, and he found they hated the Germans.
Yeah, of course.
But they had been
fighting.
And he said, let's separate out these Poles and let's start a Polish army from the Polish prisoners and then turn them against them. And so this was kind of his baby, and he built this thing up. He got these Polish prisoners and turned them into an army.
That's an incredible story. You would never know that, I suppose, looking at him, right?
No, he was quiet. I mean, he was the CIA. He was quiet. And
if he told you anything, he'd have to kill you.
Right. He was in London and woke up one morning and there was an unexploded bomb in the front yard. I mean, he could have been killed. Just had amazing experiences and survived it and did amazing things when given a chance.
How did he interact with your kids?
Well,
he was there.
He was there, and he was just, he was very smart, had lots of stories. Kids just loved him. He was just there and had something to say and something to do and loved them unconditionally, which I think is a grandpa's chief job, is to love their grandkids unconditionally. And then, he was somebody to be proud of.
Yeah. Do your kids, do they know how remarkable your dad and your wife, I mean, they get it.
Not when they were kids.
No, not when they're kids.
They had no idea. But now, they've got their own kids and they have the big picture of the world. Wow, Dad was amazing. My dad was in Korea.
Yeah.
My dad was in charge of the aid stations in the MASH movie, where you'd have ambulances come.
They do triage.
Right.
Yeah.
They'd have ambulances come. You'd have the helicopters bringing wounded. Well, my dad was the one that was in charge of taking the wounded and getting them to the MASH unit. Conditions are completely exactly right.
Really?
Said, but those doctors were the best in the world.
Really?
So those doctors, MASH doctors, they didn't mess around. There was no funny business. These were the serious, best surgeons that the United States could produce. And he said they were fabulous surgeons. It saved so many lives. And he was a pediatrician, so he wasn't.
Yeah, tell us about how he literally himself is through what he's done as a pediatrician, but also his trip to Russia. Tell us about that.
Well, he had promised my mother that they would be missionaries at some point. Mm-hmm. And so when he turned 70, he finally retired. And then he was called to go to Siberia to take concepts of infant resuscitation into the Russian system. And the Russian system they have terrific neonatal hospitals. They have terrific delivery hospitals. And they were losing their kids between, they do titanium in Russia. Mm-hmm. They just don't do concrete. Everything's falling apart in Russia because they don't know how to do concrete. Mm-hmm. But boy, they can do titanium. Mm-hmm. So that's the same thing. The high-end stuff was really good. They had some really high-end. So he goes to Ekaterinburg, which is just over the Urals into Siberia. It's the third largest city in Russia.
I didn't know that.
Ekat, as they call it. Formerly Sverdlovsk. It's where General Zhukov transported by train all of their industrial base.
Mm-hmm.
They reset up their industrial base in Ekaterinburg and then built all the tanks and then came back to take down
Is it outside of the range of the Nazi bombers?
Right,
Most likely.
That's 1,000 miles.
Wow.
It's a long ways away. It's a long ways away from Moscow. But 3 million people, and they went there, and he taught infant resuscitation in the medical school there. And they were so impressed with the system that he taught that they adopted this infant resuscitation as a what we call a medical practice that you have to do to get these babies from delivery to a neonatal hospital. They adopted it in the Oblast, which is a Russian state, as official, and then finally they adopted it nationwide.
Country Russia.
And interestingly enough, he was there. Mom and Dad were there for 18 months. By the time they left, they had taught English, and so taught in medical school, so I knew the entire high-end medical community. They taught English to the mayor, the fire chief, the police chief, and so they knew most of the political folks. And then they had their church people, and after 18 months, they knew 10 times the number of Russians that the average Russian knows.
Wow.
Because the average Russian doesn't, you survive in Russia by keeping your head down, and you have a few people close knit, but you can't trust anybody else. And that's how they've survived for 70 years of bad government. And they knew everybody. They knew so many people. They had just a fabulous time.
Did they speak Russian at all?
My dad learned Russian. My dad, who had learned German, learned Spanish, he had some passable Russian at 72. He started learning Russian. He said it was a challenge. He said, "Well, I can't remember my friends' names. I'm supposed to be learning Russian." But
Right.
they just had a marvelous time.
Wow. Okay, now here's the tough question for you. You've had your dad and Karen's dad with magnificent. I mean, the phrase "lives well spent" comes to mind. What do you synthesize? You have a burden, my friend, on your shoulders. How do you synthesize, and how do you be Steve? You're not Joe, and you're not your father-in-law.
Yeah.
But what do you synthesize, and how do you try to become Steve the grandpa?
It's all about kind of your situation. It's also situational.
Mm-hmm.
We're blessed that we have 11 of our grandkids within 20 minutes of our, and though my kids are 15 years, youngest to oldest 15 years, they're all married in 2.5 years. And so they're raising, so we got a pile of kids, that are 14 down to, so they're just kind of, we have like one every age in every grade of school but one or something like that. So that's our situation, and how do you max that situation? What I found is I really had a great one-on-one relationship with the oldest ones because there weren't so many. And now I have to be kind of a grandpa to a group more. And so that kind of changes. My oldest grandson, we had a great time. He kind of has an entrepreneurial bent. I got these little popsicle molds when he was 7 or 8 or whatever it was. We started figuring out crazy flavors. We had rattlesnake venom. We had hamster vomit, and then we'd grind up some like fruit, put it in there. That became hamster vomit, chunky style. So we just had this, that was great. And I haven't been able to do that. I have that kind of attention as I'm now dealing with.
You got more to deal with.
Yeah.
But
you can organize bigger activities. I try to, in the end, the closer you get to immortality is having your grandchildren show up at your funeral and have fond memories. So that's my goal in life is. So I tell my grandkids that the most important day of the year is my birthday. And then I put on a great big party for me.
For you.
You
Yeah.
know.
Yeah.
And we...
This has sort of images of narcissism.
Exactly. It's all tongue-in-cheek. You know, it's tongue-in-cheek, but they know it's tongue-in-cheek. It's this kind of interaction you want to get with your...
So what do you do at the party?
Various things. And now we almost always have snow cones, and they make their own, they grind their own ice.
Hamster vomit.
Right. We have rented and have acquired and rent additional bounce houses. So our yard is packed to the brim with bounce houses, and then I usually try to incorporate a Nerf gun kind of biathlon thing, you know, where they have to shoot balloons and they have to run and slide down this. And
oh, very fun.
And then we usually add pinatas. Gotta be candy. You know, there's got to be candy.
Has to be candy.
Has to be candy. That's a great thing about being a grandparent. Being a grandparent is such a, you know, you don't have the same responsibilities, and you just, I drive my kids crazy. And but we time them, and we have prizes, and we want them to have something to look forward to. But education is also hard. We want to educate them, so I've taught them how to squirt whipping cream into their mouths without contaminating the nozzle.
Now that is a great life skill right there. Without having...
My wife actually hates that, and my grandkids absolutely love it. So I go to Costco and I always get the 3-pack of spray whipping cream, because we have a great time with our grandkids.
Oh, now that's a lovely life skill.
So those are life skills that are important for them to learn. I think the most important thing is just find out ways to have fun. You know, a grandpa that'll play with you builds self-worth like you can't believe. Okay? Grandpa loves me, you know. Grandpa loves me enough that he will play with me. He will interact with me. Yeah. He you know.
Yeah.
I think that's, and that depends on your situation. You know, my dad wasn't that close to my family at the time when my father-in-law was, because my father-in-law retired at
earlier
62, and he was older, and so my kids interacted with him a couple times a week. He would take us all out to dinner, and he was very generous. He was always buying everybody stuff, and I had to kind of hold that down. Fabulous man. So we had a wonderful relationship, but then they passed away. And then my parents got older. Unfortunately, my dad didn't retire to get back from Russia until like my 3 of my kids were in college. But after that, then we built a wonderful relationship with my parents when they had time.
But it sounds like it was a nice kind of 1-2 punch with Karen's folks.
Yes.
And then, I mean, but you're right. It's all fact and time and situational. It could be health related too.
Yes. Yeah. My dad had terrific health. My littlest brother, 12 years younger than I am, my dad had a tremendous relationship with his kids. And he had a bunch of boys, and my dad taught him tennis and taught him skiing and all kinds. So he had a much tighter relationship with them than he had with my kids, because my kids were a function of time.
Okay, I've got a question for you. Thinking about that, there's some grandpas out there that say, you know what, I've screwed up. I've played too much golf. I've watched too many ball games on TV. I haven't been as great a grandpa as I need to be. I am, let's pick an age, 72. What advice would you give to somebody who's kind of saying, I have regrets, but you don't want to let those regrets just, kind of keep you from going? What kind of advice would you have for grandpas that way?
Well, I think at any age you can do so. You can interact with your grandkids. Just like at any age you can interact with your own children, right?
Yeah.
And look at my dad, who's 99, 100, and he's on the phone talking to a grandson who lives in South Carolina or someplace, and he's interacting with them, and he's built this relationship with he and his girlfriend, and his girlfriend loves dad, and they send him presents, and he built this relationship, and it had been a rocky relationship because of some past things, but he kept working on it, and he had his skills. There's no question, he had great skills, but he just kept after it. And
is there hope?
Well, my father-in-law, he was essentially an absent dad, but he was an incredible grandpa.
Yeah.
And I think it's function. If you're trying to build something and you're trying to make something of yourself and you're trying to pay the bills and you're busy, that means that your time is, you've only got so much time. The biggest problem is energy. You ask me what's my kryptonite, and I think my kryptonite is I'm getting slow and lazy.
I wouldn't know about that. You're right, though. But do you find that you get kind of energized when you get out of that slow, and then I do something? There's something magical that happens when I do something that I know I should be doing with my grandchildren. It's like I get a shot of something, right? And it really energizes me. Yeah, right.
One of your visions is inspiring me. You're talking about stories. My grandkids aren't at the age where they care much about stories. For the story, they want a Harry Potter kind of a story. Yeah. But as they get older, they're going to be more and more interested in that. And I think even if you haven't connected with your grandkids when they were little, I think you got a great chance to connect with your grandkids with your stories. And I think it doesn't matter what the stories are. The crazier, the better. Yeah. The more interesting, the better.
My own theory is if you look like a doofus, and I have plenty of doofus moments in my life, but if I tell a story where I don't come across as, it makes me vulnerable, but I've got all these funny stories of, this is what I did, I shouldn't have done, or I couldn't believe I did this. I had to, kind of maneuver out of this situation. And to me, stories need to have some sort of moral to it. If it's being told by a grandpa, you don't have to say the moral of this story is, but you can let him kind of figure it out. Sometimes the moral of the story is Grandpa was once like you, and he turned out okay, and Grandpa loves you, and will continue to love you. I just think that we have this ability to be this powerful last influence, and depending on what our energy levels are, our health levels. And I just think that these stories, have just incredible impact. And so I want to learn how to tell better stories. I want to help teach grandpas how to dig stories out of their lives. And it's not that you're trying to do stand-up comedy, because, with your phone, you can do, hey, I just had an interesting experience that came to my mind. I just think this is a great place, and you can take inspiration from other grandpas. And my attitude with the Grandpa channel, it's like Winston Churchill. Somebody came up to him and said, Clement Attlee is a very modest man. And to which Churchill is reported to have said, yes, he is a very modest man, but he has much to be modest about. And I feel like I have much to be modest about as a grandpa. I don't have all the answers. And just talking to you, go, man, I could do this, or I could do something. And you tailor it, to who you are and what your family is.
And where they are.
Exactly. And that's the thing I have a problem with sometimes. I think they're little adults, and and anyway. So if you had to sum up, this is maybe a final question for you. What do you think, give me a couple of your strengths as a grandpa.
Well, I think I have the strength that most grandpas have, that I love my grandkids, and I don't have the same responsibilities to sending the wrong message when I'm on their side by spoiling them. I think you can be free to spoil them. So that's the big advantage that you have. And I think if you realize that, and you realize that your grandkids are going to be interested in you as they get older, or your history and your stories and what I think just loving them and what would you call it? Reaching your grandchildren, where they are. Wherever they are, whatever, know their interests, know what they're doing, and then interact at that level. And I find teasing is not not mean teasing,
No.
but fun teasing.
Fun teasing.
Trying to make it fun. It really works well with the younger kids. They seem to love it. They seem to like the interaction because they know that Grandpa loves them and spends the time to know what's going on and make jokes about them and make life fun and interact. Take advantage of that if you can. Yeah. Everybody has their own challenges. You're able to retire early, and you have them available. You have to fly to get there.
They have special needs or special things that you've got to be really familiar with. But that goes back to what you're saying, that you got to really know them. One thing that strikes me, just the final thing, and I think your stories of your grandparents really, you realize, and you're making me realize that I am the fountainhead of knowledge for their great grandfathers. And I think that I would want to have one of my strengths be that I would teach them to love their ancestors by stories, not just, and by name. And maybe even if you're in a position to travel, for instance, which nobody has to push or twist my arm to travel to Denmark. But if I were there, I'd want to combine that into a heritage thing where I know where one of my third great grandfather is buried in a mass grave. He was an inmate in a Danish prison, and he was buried in this mass grave, ruins of a temple, or not a temple, but a castle in Nyborg, Denmark. And to me, if I could, I just want to light my grandkids on fire. Not literally, mind you, but, just get them thinking about that they're here, we're here, you're here, I'm here because of great, wonderful men, And so I think that sort of excites me. And in a small way, it's like trying to turn the hearts of the grandfathers to the grandchildren, and the grandchildren to the grandpas.
Right.
And I think one of the side benefits is that your children will really appreciate, they might say, oh man, he's spoiling them rotten, but they'll really appreciate you and me telling them, how cool their grandparents were and what wonderful heritage they have.
So it's occurred to me, you challenged me to think of stories, realized this is the one I need to tell my grandkids. They're old enough to understand this.
Yes.
My grandmother, her father was killed in a horse and buggy accident. My grandmother's father was killed in a horse and buggy accident. So she grew up without a father. She lived to travel the world by jet, and she lived to see the moon landing. Think of that. Maybe that gives them perspective. That's the story that I can tell my grandkids that. I'm going to tell them all that.
We'll have you come back on and see how successful. When I've tried to give stories, sometimes I tried to give an Easter message, I told you a little bit, and it was a miserable failure because I didn't consider the audience, and there are a bunch of things that happened, but I keep thinking that I want to up level. I want to be I just want to be a better grandpa. And I'd like to thank you, Steve, for coming and giving me some great ideas and talking about things that we grandpas need to think about. And we don't need to necessarily spend so much time improving our handicap or, doing this or doing that, but focus on the things that really matter. So thank you very much.
You're welcome. Be happy to share my recipe for hamster vomit Popsicles.
Sign me up. That's a great name, right? That's it for today's episode of the Grandpa Channel. Leave a review, share it with a friend, or better yet, tell your favorite grandpa. We're on a mission to gather 1 million grandpas, storytellers, wisdom keepers, and lovable wild cards. Until next time, keep the mic hot, the memories fresh, and the jokes just slightly inappropriate. I'm out of here.